Welcome to This Week in Local, a Localogy podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Localogy analysts Mike Boland and Charles Lachlan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Mike Boland, and my guest today is Dan Hight, who is VP of Advertising and Media Partnerships at Placer, and my Localogy colleague who works with us on lots of things, including conference programming. So, Dan, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mike. Always great to be here at any Localogy event.
Yeah, actually, I should say welcome back to the program. You've been our guest before. So, Dan, you wear several hats, as I mentioned. You're our resident expert for all things location and location intelligence. And as noted, you're running several sessions at the upcoming L24 conference, which is actually home field advantage for you in Dallas, right?
It is. I don't have to travel very far. It's nice to not have to get on a plane to go to another conference. So it's always nice
Yeah,
when
yeah.
it's in your
We
backyard.
we had 2 shows in LA, in the last couple of years, and that was great for me because same thing. I was getting
Yep.
in a car instead of a plane.
There you
Um,
go.
so anyway, today we have you here to talk about sort of the top trends that you're watching in the broader location intelligence sector. That's everything from privacy and data strategies to, digital out of home advertising and the exploding area of retail media networks.
Mhm.
And these are obviously top of mind because you're in the middle of programming and managing several sessions at L24 next month.
Yep.
So let's jump right in. And we'll start with sort of the broadest of those topics I mentioned, which is privacy. Lots to talk about there. What are the sort of top, recent market developments that you're looking at right now that people should be aware of?
Sure. Well, there's a lot to unpack there. We could probably have a whole session just on privacy and
Yep.
what's happening around the space. But suffice to say that, privacy is getting more stringent, not less stringent. If I think you just think of the most broad macro aspects of it, whether consumers becoming more aware around privacy, whether you have continued pressure from operating system changes, most recently, and probably the one that's most notoriety today is Chrome has 1% of the Chrome usage now no longer has third-party cookies
Yep.
being used, and we've been hearing about the cookie apocalypse I think for years now, and now we're starting to see it, and Chrome will have deprecation of all third-party cookies by the end of the year. So what marketers and agencies have been planning on, I'll say that a lot of the planning has not really taken place, as we're kind of finding out, but it is now starting to happen. So where you're seeing it from a privacy perspective, the platforms are taking a much more reticent view on that now. And so I think what we're starting to see from an industry perspective is a lot of cohort based solutions, and nobody wants PII coming into their solutions. How do I take my first party data, couple it with a PII free solution or a cohort based solution so they stay above the privacy fray? You're also starting to see the FTC getting a lot more involved with this. I won't name specific companies to protect the innocent, if you will, but the FTC has put out several orders against a few different companies, and those are for public comment, so people can go see those. But suffice to say that the government is getting more involved with this. The Senate has also put out a letter against another company to ask, and a lot of that gets to usage of data in terms of the types of places that people are going. So one is the data collection itself, and are you
Hmm.
informing the consumers kind of the opt-in and what you're doing with it? The second is really about the types of venues that you're collecting that data around, sensitive locations. Think anything that has to do with women's reproductive rights right now. That's one of the Senate letters that was just issued by one of the senators out of Oregon last month, actually. So there's a lot that's happening around the use, the collection of it, and the types of places that people are collecting this data around. So you kind of have those two kind of paradigms from a location data perspective, coupled with, again, third party cookie deprecation. So what I think we're seeing from an industry perspective is people are like, okay, we don't want any PII. Like, so if we can get away from PII, you work with a cohort based solution. How do we make sure that our solutions are future proof from where the industry regulation and operating system changes are, all kind of coming together.
Mhm. So it's interesting. You mentioned a couple different entities there, and it seems like we can
Yep.
sort of bisect this by private and public sector. And there's a lot
Yep.
of scrutiny coming from both, right? I mean, you have
Yep.
FTC, you have the government cracking down, but also equally or perhaps more sort of influential in driving all of this are the platforms. You have Google,
Yep.
or the example you gave is a browser, but it's also Google as a platform.
Yep.
So it's interesting. We're seeing that pressure from like both of those, but I think in all cases, the concepts are similar and the best practices become similar. As you mentioned, really it's all about, staying above board by using one first party data. And then two,
Mhm.
let me make sure I understood you correctly. When you're talking
Yeah.
about outside data, third party data, you just have to make sure that it is cohort based in that it is in a broader level. You have consumers without personal identifying information that are more in
Yep.
sort of just these sort of audience buckets, and you can
Yep.
use that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, and I think everyone is figuring out what that, if they're using geodata on that,
Yep.
it's a question of what is my large enough audience segmentation so that I'm not identifying that it is Mike Boland. And so,
Yeah.
how do I stay above that fray? So, that could be at a census block group level. So, basically, somewhere between 400 and 800 households. It could be at a zip 4 for some people, it could be at a zip code, it could be at a hex 3 tile, which is the
Hmm.
structure that Uber originally built. So a lot of agencies are now starting to do hex 3 tiles at different size resolutions. But for the layman audience, it's basically groups of people. I don't want to target an individual. I want to target groups of people. And that allows you to stay above the fray from a privacy perspective, whether that's from what the regulators are doing and looking at, or what the operating system changes are continuing to put pressure on the ecosystem.
Yeah. Now, one last question before we move on. When we're still talking
Yeah.
about privacy, there's also a move towards other strategies that are, again, sort of privacy safe because you're not targeting location or behavior, but instead the adjacent content, and that brings in the
Content.
world of contextual advertising. We've seen like a rise in contextual, a return to contextual. That was what the internet and what print media and all these sources used to be about before the internet and
Yep.
mobile devices came along, and now they're getting sort of a second life in this privacy environment.
100%. I think we actually touched on that on one of our panel conversations, actually at the Place conference, was around that kind of the return to content based and contextual based strategies. And again, if you're on a website that is about auto, then you're probably in market, or at least have an affinity to
Yep.
cars. So that might be a good reason if you're BMW to advertise on, caranddriver, .com. Those are, again, we're kind of seeing an homage back to the past of types of advertising that are again privacy safe, and again more content or contextual based solutions.
Nice. So all of this, we're going to be obviously talking about at the conference during the sessions you're running, privacy sort of threads throughout all of these things.
Oh,
Now
sure.
let's move on to the next big sort of macro topic, which is digital out of home.
Hmm.
And this is a growing area that a lot of people are probably familiar with, and it's been around a while, but I think we're also seeing a lot of dynamism. Like privacy, it continues to shift the strategies. Privacy actually bears in on it in terms of the ways you can or can't both target ads and also sort of attribute and report performance. So, what is sort of the state of the art there? What are the sort of latest happenings, and what should people be paying attention to in terms of the world of digital out of home?
Yeah, so out of home obviously is probably the original location based ad, and
Yeah.
those screens are becoming more and more digital and using more and more data to inform what type of ads that you should be running and even the content that you want to be doing. So not all of these things are ads. We think about them as ads for a lot of these things, but sometimes they're used just for displaying content in different types
Yeah.
of arenas. So you start thinking about where these things are. We think about out of home, more broadly around billboards, which is true. Billboards are part of out of home. So are bus shelters. If you're going down Manhattan, you kind of see these things along Fifth Avenue. These are, digital signs that are there. You see them inside of stadiums. So anyone who's gone to a sporting event or to a music concert, there's ads all over the place in that arena. You go
Yep.
to an airport, that's what you see everywhere. So these screens are seemingly everywhere. And really, because the cost of the screens has been coming down over time. So you're starting to see these signs going into, you know, outdoor malls, indoor malls, shopping centers all over the place. And so you're just seeing this to be much more of a data driven strategy, very similar to contextual based advertising. The place becomes the context, not necessarily the content that you're on, because obviously, if you're inside of a shopping center or a shopping mall, your context is you're probably in the shopping mode. If you're an airport, you're in the travel mode. So you start thinking about the types of advertising that you might see there based on the type of audience that is in there, from the time of day that they're in there. Is this like are you reaching a business traveler? Are you reaching a leisurely travel sector? If you're inside of a Marriott hotel, for instance, you're reaching a certain type of customer. So you're seeing these types of retail media networks that are also starting to prop up in the out of home space. But the general sense of it is this is becoming more programmatic, more data driven, and then just like everything else, more measurable. So
Hmm.
all advertising wants to be measured to something. And I think what happened, saw a little bit of a backlash, right, in terms of the one-to-one ad targeting we were just talking about with privacy perspective, from a measurement perspective as well. So Mike Boland saw an ad, Mike Boland did this. That's what we're starting to move away from, and moving more to groups of people, which plays very well to the out-of-home ecosystem. And so we're starting to see a lot of buyers now starting to pay attention to the out-of-home world, very similar to the connected TV world, because I'm reaching groups of people. And then I'm measuring the effectiveness of my ad more holistically with my omni-channel ad strategy. Am I seeing, more footfall traffic going into McDonald's by advertising both from a connected TV perspective, but also from out of home perspective? Am I seeing a rise of foot traffic going in there? So you're seeing it more measurable. You're seeing it more ad targeted from data, and you're seeing it more programmatically. Those are the big trends that we're seeing overall from a digital out of home perspective.
Yeah, and this seems to trace back to the privacy discussion that we just had,
Mhm.
and it's almost analogous to that move towards contextual that we saw. And in this case, it's privacy friendly inherently, because you're talking about segmenting an audience in a way that's responsible. With the contextual advertising, you're segmenting them based on which website they show up on or which magazine they pick up. It's the content that segments them. In this case, it's the place that
Place.
segments them.
Mhm.
If you're running an ad, like you said, at the Marriott or at a stadium, you can deduce a certain amount of ad targeting based on, sports fans or business travelers or just those sort of audience segments that sort of become
Yeah.
clear based on where the
Yeah.
thing's popping up.
And if you break down a stadium, at its core, so, obviously at L24, we're going to be there in Arlington, right next to Dallas Cowboys, AT&T Stadium that's right there. Well, AT&T Stadium on a Sunday when the Cowboys are playing is a very different audience than on a Saturday night when, Taylor Swift is there. Same
Yep.
venue, two very different context of who those people actually are. So to your
Definitely.
point, the place and the time provides the context of who these people actually are, which again gets to your very similar point of targeting websites based on their content, targeting a place based on the content that is there and the context of when it's being done.
Yeah. So who are the players in this space? Let's sort of show rather than tell. I know at the L24 conference, I think you're going to be talking to companies like Broadsign and
Mhm.
Vistar, I believe. Like who, just a few
Yep.
examples of the players in this space.
Yeah, so you really have a couple different people in this. You have the owners of the venues itself. So think about this as the place.
Yep.
So Cowboy Stadium, let's use AT&T Stadium, they actually own that venue, they own the screens that are in there. For the out-of-home ecosystem, you have the billboard companies themselves. So these are the Outfront Medias, the Clear Channels, the JC Decodes of the world, the Lamars of the world. A lot of these are very large publicly traded companies. They actually own these screens. You have the mall operators, so Simon Malls and Westfield Malls and Brookfield Malls. They own these malls. You have the airports themselves. Think about DFW Airport. When people are traveling in for L24, a lot of them are going to be going through DFW Airport. These are malls, and Clear Channel Airports has
Hmm.
malls or airports. JC Deco, I think, has the airport at DFW. So these are the operators. Then you have the platforms. You have the programmatic platforms. Vistar Media being one of the largest programmatic platforms. They'll be on the stage at L24, and these are the people who operate the demand side platforms and the supply side platforms. You have companies like Vistar. You have companies like Place Exchange are in this space. You have companies like Luke TV that are in this space that are running programmatic ads in different types of venues. Then you have the content management systems. Broadsign is one of those. They're actually the largest in the space. That, one thing is the ad spot. I need to play the ad, but how do you get the content actually delivered to the
Yep.
actual screen? So again, very similar to the digital ecosystem, where you got to have the ad play, but you got to have a way of delivering the actual video, or in this case, the image that's going to go on that screen. So Broadsign is one of those content management services. There's Place Exchange is another one of the content management services that's out there. So kind of have both of those players. And then you have obviously the measurement of those. So measurement companies, Foursquare is one that does out of home measurement. Placer does out of home measurement. My company, we do it as well. You have companies like M4 that do a lot of the brand lift studies. So again, not everything is about driving footfall traffic. Some of it is driving, sentiment about a brand view. So M4 does a lot of this type of stuff. So these are some of the ecosystem providers. And then, of course, you have the agencies that actually do the out of home. So Group M out of home is one of those. Talent is a very large independent agency that does a lot of this stuff. So large ecosystem that provides all these solutions.
It almost exactly mirrors like sort of the online ad tech ecosystem. You have publishers, you have advertisers, you have agencies, you have CMS, you have an ad network, and it's like measurement companies. It's
There,
sort of like, yeah.
there,
Um,
there's a
so
LumaScape for the out of home industry, just like for the ad tech
yeah, just
industry.
like anything else. Yeah, exactly. So that's fascinating. Now let's move on to the next topic, which is sort
Yeah,
of an offshoot or a subset, or at least it's
yeah,
related to digital out of home, which is the
certainly.
wide world of retail media. And you have
Yeah,
players from Lowe's to Walmart that are treating all of their in-store physical inventory as a way to sort of, monetize that square footage, as a way to, incremental revenue for the retailers, but also to have sort of a deeper relationship with a lot of the products that they carry on the shelves and increase sort of basket sizes. And it
right.
makes a lot of sense. It's a very lower funnel play because you're, feet or inches from the cash register in some cases. So a lot of retailers are really jumping on this. And like we just talked about, there's also an ecosystem forming. So tell us about that sort of world of retail media and what's happening these days.
Yeah, retail media is a really interesting one. A lot of retail media was historically around e-commerce. So Amazon obviously being the 800-pound gorilla in e-commerce, and from a retail media perspective, the lion's share of retail media dollars are going to Amazon today.
Mhm.
Uh, Walmart being a number two in that space from an e-com perspective, and historically, a lot of the brands were about monetizing and digitizing their mobile websites, their apps, and their websites. So ads on Target.com, ads within Target's app. You have Instacart that's in that space, right? In terms of, you're going to Instacart to buy things and you're seeing ads in that. Uber along the way, like, all of a sudden now you're traveling and you're going somewhere, Uber's getting into the space. So a lot of this was really on the e-com side. Now what you're starting to see is all of these retailers have physical stores. Like, how do I leverage the physical store as part of retail media? Historically, that was thought of shopper marketing dollars. Think about like end cap displays inside of
Yeah.
supermarkets, or think about, you're checking out at a 7-Eleven and you see an ad on the payment terminal that's coming up. These were
Yeah.
historically where these things were coming.
Or
Now you're
Costco
starting
free
to see
sample stations.
Costco free samples. Target does the same thing. And it's really
Yeah.
about how do you, again, you're targeting the right person at the right time with the right ad, if you will. And that
Yeah.
could be in a physical format with a cookie. It could be
Yeah.
in a store circular historically, or end cap displays. But all of a sudden you have all these retailers saying, you know what? We're digitizing all of our websites. We're doing these things with all these ads. How do we start bringing some of that stuff inside of our venues? Now, when you start thinking about the physical store, it's large. You also don't want to disrupt the consumer journey. You don't want to have the 90s version of pop-up ads in front of consumers as they're walking down aisles, and they're trying to do is just get back to the milk and buy it or get their loaf of bread. You don't want to necessarily disrupt their shopping patterns. But at the same time, this is a great place to connect the last mile with consumers. So right now you have this concept of store as a medium that people are talking about. How do I leverage the whole of my assets, both inside the store, but as well as the exterior of my store? With a click and collect, how do I take advantage of that when people are sitting there waiting for employees to bring their groceries out to them or to bring their merchandise out to them? They're just sitting there. It's a great place to
Yep.
merchandise to consumers that are waiting. So all of a sudden, you have retailers now thinking about the whole of their assets, their digital assets and their physical assets, in a way that they never have before. Now,
Mhm.
that unleashes a whole set of new challenges, because now you're dealing with the real estate people, you're dealing with
Yep.
the merchandising people, you're dealing with the vendors, the shopper marketing vendors that are actually, the CPG companies and the manufacturers that have the products in there that need to be sold. So all of a sudden, you're dealing with whole different slews of people that historically you weren't necessarily dealing with from a digital perspective. So it adds a lot of complexity there. But as we keep talking about for ages, we keep talking about the rise of e-commerce. 80% of all retail is still taking place in the physical world. So
Mhm.
while we're talking about e-commerce is great, and you think about like grocery, it's 88% still taking place in the physical world. So again, this is
Yep.
why retailers and advertisers are starting to focus on the physical stores in much greater aptitudes that they've ever thought about before. And again, when you start thinking about digitizing these things, the cost of infrastructure, the cost of the screens, a lot of this ecosystem that we've talked about before for the digital out of home world is now being deployed in these physical stores. So
Yeah.
we'll be talking about that both from an e-commerce perspective, because you can't forget about the digital world, and also talking about the physical world. So these are just great examples of, again, tying the offline and the online worlds together, and again this convergence of these worlds like we've never seen before.
Yeah. So expanding that ad inventory, gaining economies of scale in going from, as you put it, just like digital media and then also physical in store media. Walmart, who you mentioned, just actually tripled down and went even a step further by buying Vizio. Now they have
Yeah.
additional ad inventory that is 18 million screens across the world, in terms of when you're firing up your TV and the menu screen, the navigation screen, or other sort of streaming. That gets us into the world of OTT, over the top sort of advertising. But it's interesting that it carries forward that concept you mentioned, in just gaining greater sort of revenue diversification and economies of scale by having your online and digital channels and your physical media channels. It's interesting now Walmart is sort of bringing a third dimension to that. You could argue probably Amazon is doing the same thing, because they have some television hardware in the market with their Fire TVs. But it certainly sort of extends that principle one step further. Now, who are the folks? Just like I asked you when we were talking about digital out of home, who are the sort of exemplars here worth pointing to? I believe that you will be interviewing at L24 Veracast, correct?
Veracast and Microsoft. So those are two
Yeah, there you
players
go.
that we can certainly talk about. So Microsoft with their Promote IQ, and Veracast, historically was a direct mail company with Velasas and shopper marketing, and now they're bringing those solutions to in-store retail media in a box. But the players in this space, I mean, you mentioned two of them. I mean, Amazon is the largest in the space, and Amazon, not just from an e-commerce perspective, but they have digital screens within their stores. If you go into Whole Foods, you go to Amazon Fresh stores, there are digital screens within that.
Hmm.
And you mentioned, it's great that you mentioned Walmart. I should have mentioned that. That's a Walmart Connect play, and it's all about advertising. And again, to the point of reaching 18 million, owners of Vizio screens, very similar to what Samsung has done. But it's also so they can put in digital signage within their more than 5,000 retail locations. So this is
Hmm.
the play to bring retail media to a whole different level. Samsung is doing this. LG is doing this from a hardware perspective. Sony is doing this from a hardware perspective as well. You have every major retailer that is doing this. Um, Albertsons is doing this. They have a whole division called Albertsons Collective. You have Kroger that's doing this from an 8451 perspective. You have Lowe's and Home Depot. They're doing it more on the retail side. You have Macy's that's doing this. So you have the retailers that are doing this, and you have the platform companies. Veracast is doing this. We have Vibenomics that's doing this more from an amalgamation perspective. You have the computer vision companies that are doing this. So again, Not cameras to detect is Mike Boland there, but can I just detect that a body is in front of a screen within a venue? They were, cooler screens rather, that has screens on coolers inside of pharmacies, inside of grocery stores, detecting is a body in front of that screen, so I can know to play ad content. And then again, from a last mile perspective, you can understand a lot of things around people going to a store. A whole new set of technology of inside of the store. So this could be everything from, again, computer vision. This could be RFID technology of tags.
Yep.
This could be near field communication. A lot of the Wi-Fi sensors are getting a lot smarter of understanding where they are. So I'll think about navigating within a shopping mall. All of a sudden now you can get a lot more better triangulation about where you are within a shopping mall. Again, think about kind of your normal use case. You open up Google Maps within a shopping mall, you get a big blue circle. I know you're in the shopping mall, but I don't know where you are within the shopping mall. Are you in the I don't know, Bath and Body Works, or are you in the Gap next door to it? You really can't detect that using traditional location services. You need something that's more on premise to understand where you are with that type of specificity. But all of a sudden, you have all this technology that's coming in to understand kind of that last mile and ultimately get into that last inch. So you have a lot of players in that space that are all coming together. Intel's doing a lot of stuff. Google's focusing a lot on this. I mentioned Microsoft. They'll be at L24 talking about some of the stuff that they're doing. So you have the big players, the tech players, the platforms, and the media companies are all getting into this space.
Yeah, it's fascinating that like the seemingly sleepy world of retail, this is like not your grandfather's retail. There's, a lot of interesting things happening. So you can actually catch Dan and myself and a lot of the companies he mentioned at L24 in Dallas, April 15th through 17th. So Dan, that's all the time we have, but I want to thank you for joining us, sharing your insights. Anything more you want to add before we read us out?
Go Cowboys, and come see us in Dallas.
All right. So thanks everyone for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. You can find the show on all major podcast networks and find out more at localogy.com. So please subscribe, like, and comment. Your engagement helps others find us. And if you're interested in being a guest or sponsor, you can email us at podcast@localogy.com. So I'm Mike Boland. Our producer is Dara Sweat. Thanks to Dan Hight for joining us. Thank you all for listening, and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Localogy's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Loughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.